I needed a shelf for some of my earliest creations. One is out of clay and the other out of wood. The comic strip character Andy Capp was a favorite of mine growing up, and the wood object is called a Feelie. Let's just say it was an assignment from a very different art professor my freshman year in college. It came from a chunk of an old fence post he found out in the country. It did pique my interest in woodworking and wood grain, though. About a year later, I built my first shelf, probably due in part to this wooden piece of art. If you check under Andy's feet, there's a date carved into them that puts this into a little historical perspective. Needless to say, some of us were creators long before YouTube ever came around. Let's use this video to recreate my first shelf build using the same tools and ideas from 45 years ago. This should be fun. The first woodworking project I ever did completely of my own initiative was to build a small bookshelf. I was a young married guy and we lived in an 8x40 mobile home. I had just enough room in one corner of the bedroom to put this shelf on the wall. I had no woodworking tools except a hammer, so I bought an inexpensive Black & Decker jigsaw and a piece of 1x12 pine. For this project, I'm following the same process I used back then, so this time I bought a Harbor Freight jigsaw for about $25 and a piece of material from Lowe's. You know, I had forgotten that these little fence guides that come with jigsaws really do help you cut a pretty straight line. My shelf is going to be 8 inches wide and 18 inches long. On each end on the top, I'll put bookends, and on the bottom, shelf supports. The most secure way to install it would be to put a nailer strip on the back and attach the shelf to the wall that way, but I didn't do that originally. I drilled holes in the back of the bookends and hung it from the wall with finish nails. So that's what we'll do this time. You may be surprised that even in a sheetrock wall, this works pretty well if you're careful. There are many ways to put a rounded corner on a piece of wood, but the simplest way I've found is to pick a can that is available that has the kind of radius that you want, and then just use that to mark the corner. The jigsaw is one of those basic tools that always is nice to have, but the more you grow in the number of tools you have, the less you'll find you use the jigsaw. But since this is an example of the first shelf I made, I'm doing everything with the jigsaw because that's all I had. One thing about making cuts like this, it's always difficult to keep the blade riding straight up and down, and it will tend to flare out a little bit at the bottom of the cut. So you'll have to file and sand that off in order to get your cut square. The sanding block is very easily made with a piece of wood and a belt sander belt, and in this case I'm using a 3x21 inch belt sander belt. If you trim the wood to the point where you can slip it inside the belt and add a spacer to it to take out the slack of the belt, you have a great sanding block that helps you square up the edge as I'm doing in this case. You'll also find lots of other uses for this. It just happened that along the wood grain a piece of the wood sheared away as I was cutting the corner. That gave me a little sliver I needed to glue back into place. If I was going to stain this, I would need to be much more careful when gluing it because glue left on the surface would not accept stain, and pine is notoriously difficult to stain anyway. But in this case I'm going to put clear sealer on it so I can apply the glue this way using masking tape to hold the piece in place until it dries, and then just sand it well and you'll never know the difference. Putting rounded over corners on shelves like this can certainly be done a lot easier with a router or power sanders, but if all you have is a sanding block you can still do it with that. It just takes more time. Now I just need 3 more cuts like this to give me my shelf support pieces and the bookend brackets. If I can keep from cutting my finger off trying to freehand these things with a jigsaw, that would be nice. A little more sanding and I'm ready to put the shelf together. These are the parts to my original shelf as I recall, and I think the way I kind of had this arranged, obviously the shelf goes up against the wall like that, but I put bookend pieces like this, and then as I recall I put my shelf supports like this, sort of offset a little bit from the end. I put this together with nails, with finish nails back in the day. So I'm going to do that again, but I am going to pre-drill some holes just because this wood is really soft and will tend to split if I'm not careful with it, and I'd like for this to be useful since I'm reenacting an old shelf build that I did. Without getting too carried away on the placement of the shelf supports and bookends, I put them where I thought they should go and marked holes to run a small drill bit into that is smaller than the size of the finish nails. And then took a hammer and a nail and positioned the pieces centered over the hole, tapped the nail into thin material to mark it. Then pulled the piece off and drilled a deeper hole for the final depth of the finish nail. You know, it's not particularly sophisticated, but when I was a 19-year-old kid who had never really done much of this stuff, it made sense and seemed to work, and it still works today. So with everything in place and the finish nails tapped in, I was still able to pull the parts loose because I wanted to brush on a couple of coats of finish before I did the final glue up, just so that would be done when I put the finish nails in for good and glued things in place. 40 years ago, we didn't have the quick drying finishes that are available now, so I think I used a paint thinner based varnish that gave the shelf a real yellow look, which was typical for that type of varnish. Today I love this stuff, polyacrylic by Minwax. It's really quick drying, sands up nicely, and you can get a decent build on the finish with 2 coats. If you're looking for something that penetrates the wood, this is not it, as it dries quickly and really is a coating on the surface of the material, so it doesn't really penetrate. But for a lot of projects, that's just what I'm after, and it's a real good solution for most simple project finishes. It brushes on fine and also sprays well. When spraying, you get a really nice finish. With the shelf finished, all I need to do is mount it to the wall. Lots of ways to do this, but the way I did it when I first built this project was I drilled holes in the back of the bookend portions of this and just ran finish nails into wood paneling that was behind the shelf. Ultimately, what I'll do is put a nailer strip, though, across the back inside the shelf here, and then screw into a stud to hold this in place, and that'll make it a permanent fixture. I don't really remember for sure if I had a drill or not on my original build. I kind of don't think I did. But if I did, I know for sure that I had to have a key to lock the drill bit into the chuck and an extension cord long enough to get where I needed to drill. No such thing as keyless chucks and popping a fresh battery into the drill. I know this looks very odd, but I'm just showing you what I did many years ago, and you know, it worked. Wouldn't want to load it up with a whole lot of heavy books, but it worked. This is obviously a project that most anyone can take on, and I have to say I really enjoy doing it. So thanks for watching, and let me encourage you to check back every week or so and see what's new around Dop's workshop. Oh well. It's not the first time the Feelie's ever taken a spill.